It's finally here. We got the Hooligans League Mark III Awards Ceremony and Distinction created by myself, the league commissioner. Let's hop right into it. Acknowledgement of our mascot, who has not changed. For those of you who aren't aware, it's Kyle. And there he is. There he goes, and he's gone. But wait, he's back. And there he goes. And here he comes again. And there he is, and now he's gone. So, here are the season distinctions. So this is based on performance of different players and performance of different teams. So, team with the most points for, so the highest scoring team in the league. And this counts only regular season. This will be a theme with the majority of season distinctions. Was the average Joe's. So Joey got himself just a little bit over 1,800 points for. Team with the least points for, so the lowest scoring team in the league, was the Alaskan Bullfrogs, so Taylor scored just above 1,350. Team with the least points against, so they are the Lucky Break team, was the Brady Bunch, so Jin. He only had just over 1,400 points scored against his team. Team with the most points against, so the No Luck team, was the Baltimore Beefcakes. So Tyler had the most strenuous opponents, and he had just over 1,600 points scored against him. So, most valuable player. This should not be hard to understand. It's the highest scoring player of any position in our league this season. And, of course, there is nobody worthy of this award other than Mr. Justin Jefferson, drafted by Joe. So he was drafted with the 10th pick in the first round, so the last pick, as the third receiver off the board. Cup went 6th, and Chase went 9th. He had 360.86 total points, only 3 games below 10 points, his lowest of which was 2.5 against the Packers in the season finale. Not the season finale, second to last season finale. He had 10 games with 100-plus receiving yards, but no games with more than 2 touchdowns, so he was basically a big receiving yards hog, and probably the reason why a PPR league would be amazing for him. So he only had 2 touchdowns from weeks 1 to 8, but he did light it up a little bit later on in the season, having 6 touchdowns from weeks 9 to 17, which propelled the Vikings into the playoffs as the NFC North champion. He had 1,809 receiving yards on the year, which is the 6th most of all time in a single season. He would have vied for the record if it weren't for a couple of bad games at the end of the season. Least valuable player. So this basically signifies a player who was projected to be among the best, but was instead among the worst while playing. Now, I had to really think about this one for a while because I thought about our first round. We had Jonathan Taylor, we had Najee Harris. Those types of guys weren't necessarily betted on being the worst, and they didn't end up being the worst. So I had to think in later rounds, and I think back to the introduction, the opening of the NFL season, and I think to a 0-point performer on Derek's team. So thus, Cam Akers is our winner, drafted by He Aiken Me, a name that appeared after that home opener. So he was drafted in round 3, pick 29 to be a starting running back. He scored 0 points in the season opener, and the Rams got steamrolled, as did their season. He scored 125.5 total points in the 14 games that he played. The others he was out due to injury. He only had 1 touchdown from weeks 1 to 12. So that was against the Bengals in week 2. He didn't have another one for the rest of that time frame. He became the only viable offensive weapon on the Rams after the injury of Cooper Kupp, waiving Darrell Henderson, and basically everyone else not producing because Allen Robinson will be Allen Robinson, and Van Jefferson was still hurt. So he had 6 touchdowns in 4 games in which Derek had actually dropped him or picked him up and put him on the bench. So he only eclipsed 100 rushing yards in weeks 16 to 17. His highest was against the Chargers, shocker, with 123. His highest fantasy point total in a week was 34.7 against the Broncos, which was that week 16 matchup, or maybe 17, one of the two. But he only eclipsed 10 fantasy points 5 times all year, 4 times in the final 5 weeks of the fantasy year, basically when he became the only option. So when the Rams team becomes oversaturated with weapons again, kind of expect him to have similar production that he did in the first 14 games. The most lopsided victory in our league, which only counts the regular season and not the playoffs, was the Week 7 matchup between Tyler and Jin, the Baltimore Beefcakes and the Brady Bunch. So, Jin scored 62.98 points. A very, very rough week. Swift and Waller were out with injury, and Cooper Kupp was on a bye, not injured yet. His highest scoring players were Justin Tucker, the kicker, who had 13, and Antonio Gibson on the bench with 16.7. Michael Gallup had a season low 0 fantasy points, and San Francisco got a whopping -4 fantasy points. Both were in the starting lineup. Tyler, on the other hand, scored 167.44 with a victory margin of 104.46, which is the most in this league's history. 4 players on his team scored 20-plus points. Joe Burrow and Austin Eckler combined for 75.94 of those points, with both at season highs on their own. Travis Etienne with 18.9 and Khalil Herbert with 15.7 were both on the bench, as were the majority of Tyler's 17 trillion running backs. So, we're on to the closest game with the smallest margin of victory all season. So, it was the Week 2 matchup between the Rodney Kings, so that was Dylan, and the CDC Guidelines, Ryan. So, Ryan scored 134.58. It's pretty good. He started CeeDee Lamb, Jahan Dotson, and Rex Burkhead over Garrett Wilson. Now, CeeDee Lamb and Jahan Dotson were both his receivers, 15.1, 17.9. Not bad results. Rex Burkhead, on the other hand, I gave him a lot of crap for that one, so 2.9, and then Garrett Wilson decided to go off for 30 on the bench with Zach Wilson. I might be wrong. It might have been Joe Flacco. Chris Godwin and Gabriel Davis were out with injuries, so he didn't really have any better choices other than Wilson to put in the spot than Rex Burkhead. Packers defense and Daniel Carlson combined for 23 fantasy points on his end, so both really productive. And all but 2 players scored in double digits for him, which were Rex Burkhead, as we already said, and Jonathan Taylor, the first overall pick of the draft. Now, the Rodney Kings scored 134.98, a margin of 0.4, which is unbelievable. All but 1 player scored in double digits for Dylan, which was the Broncos defense at 8, not too far off. Mike Williams had a season-high 25.3 fantasy points, which I was pretty thrilled with as a Chargers fan. And Kyler Murray had a season-high 25.88 fantasy points, which nobody was thrilled with because how did he only get that high on the season? Devontae Smith and Pat Freiermuth were on the bench, but they both had pretty respective games with 15 and 12.2. On to the biggest upsets. So, this won't include any matchups from the final week of the season due to the Bills-Bengals game results, specifically talking about the league championship game, because it was indeed an upset when you look at the later results of the poll questions and the season statistics. But we'll get to that point later on. So this is actually the round of 8 matchup between the Rodney Kings and the Alaskan Bullfrogs. At this point in the season, Alaskan Bullfrogs, Taylor, was dead last place. He was going into this round of 8 matchup hoping to avoid the league punishment for somehow the 3rd time in a row. And he was 2 and 11, I think, at this point. 2 wins, 11 losses. So, Dylan scored 103.52. Pretty good. Highest scored was Saquon Barkley, who had 23 points. Pat Freiermuth had a season-low 0 fantasy points. No, he was not injured. All players except for Barkley outscored by Latavius Murray and Zay Jones on the bench. Zay Jones had a season-high of 34.9 points for the Jaguars, and Latavius Murray had a second season-high 21.2 for Denver. Kyler Murray and Jeff Wilson were both injured on the bench, so he didn't really have much to work with. Taylor scored 114.04. That victory margin is wrong. Don't know why it's wrong. So it's a margin of victory of just about 11 or so, maybe a little bit less. Patrick Mahomes had a season 3rd high of 32.74 fantasy points. Don't know why I decided to consider putting in season 3rd high, just the fact that he scored a lot of points. Dalton Schultz, Kansas City's defense, and Tyler Bass only combined for 14.5 fantasy points, so not as much as they were all envisioned to score on their own, except for maybe Tyler Bass. Second highest active player was Raheem Mostert, who had 16.6 fantasy points, and Chase Edmonds and Hayden Hurst were both injured on the bench, but neither really would have contributed much, mostly because both of them aren't that great. But Trevor Lawrence was on the bench, and he scored 26.82 there. Didn't really affect the outcome all that much. Taylor was able to move on to the next round and avoid the league punishment. The best trade Now, there were only maybe 5 trades. 5 trades this year, and it's kind of hard to pick from 5 trades that all kind of have pretty similar effects, except for one of them. October 11th at 12:42 a.m. and October 13th at 4 p.m. For those in the league, you know damn well what I'm talking about. That's when I traded Miles Sanders and Mike Evans to Derek for Jamar Chase and Tony Pollard. So it was originally vetoed, but reproposed and was processed. So, needless to say, I was dead shocked when I was at work when I saw that it had gone through. So Pollard, who was originally the random piece in this trade, because my goal was to get Jamar Chase, and his goal was to get Jamar Chase out to get both Mike Evans and Miles Sanders. He became the most valuable of the trade after skyrocketing to the number 7 spot among running backs. He had 5 20-plus point games and cemented himself as potentially a top 3 round pick next year in the NFL fantasy draft. It honestly depends on what the Cowboys do with Ezekiel Elliott. Jamar Chase put up 2 30-plus point outings and made me very happy until he was injured from weeks 8 to 12. It kind of put a damper on my season. He did come back in full force and finished as the number 15 receiver after a couple of 20-point games in a row. Miles Sanders was inconsistent, but when he was consistent, he was really productive. He finished with 9 games above 10 points, 3 above 20, and became the number 13 running back out of all of them. And Mike Evans dropped off in consistency, but was still somewhat productive with multiple games above 10 points and production worthy of the number 24 receiver. Now, when I typed this, I was unaware that Mike Evans had a chip on his shoulder from something he apparently heard me say. So he decided to go out and score 48.7 fantasy points for the Tampa Bay Buccaneers to save them from elimination against the Carolina Panthers, and that pushed him from 24th to 11th among receivers. Worst trade. I'm just going to glide over this. It's not a bad trade. October 6th at 12:40, it was a trade between me and Tyler. I traded A.J. Dillon to Tyler to get J.K. Dobbins. A.J. Dillon was pretty underwhelming. He didn't have any games above 10 points until week 12. He proceeded to have 3 games above 15 and 5 games above 10 on the bench, not started except maybe once, and he got to the number 27 running back position. Dobbins had 1 productive week before falling flat, and he ended up under injured reserve after week 6. Despite him returning in week 14, and he had 2 games above 10 fantasy points after that, he didn't really warrant his trade value. He finished 53 among running backs, which is, by the way, lower than Cam Akers. Both players were non-factors for the teams, mostly since A.J. Dillon lived on the bench, and J.K. Dobbins lived on injured reserve until I dropped him in early November, and in mid-December, I think Ryan picked him up just for the last playoff push. Best regular season record was Joe. He had a whopping 11-2 record. We'll get to who he lost to when we get to the longest win streak, because, shocker, it's him. The worst regular season record, as said, was Alaskan Bullfrog, so that's Taylor. He had a 2-11 record. The longest winning streak, which only counts the regular season, so anything with playoffs does not count here. It was Joe. He won 5 games in a row from weeks 4 to 8. He was defeated by Tyler in week 9 by a score of 141.84 to 120.92 to end the win streak. It wasn't as long of a win streak as last year's teams had, but still very productive and helped him out a lot. Excuse me. Longest losing streak, which only counts the regular season, was Taylor, who lost a whopping 9 games in a row from the start of the season all the way to week 9, until he finally defeated Tyler in week 10, 137.74 to 94.1. Tyler just had a crazy year. Most consecutive weeks in first place. I don't think this will be a shocker, Joe. What will be a shocker is that he was in first place for every single week of the regular season. He finished 11-2, only losing in weeks 3 and 9 to Ryan and Tyler, respectively, and he maintained first place at the beginning of the season by points for. He had the most points for in the first week, and he kept the lead throughout the season. Most consecutive weeks in last place, also not a shocker, it's Taylor. He lost for 11 consecutive weeks. Well, he lost for a lot more, but he was in last place for 11 consecutive weeks. He took that role from Derek in week 3, and he lost it. Never. He remained in last place for the rest of the season. He finished 2-11 with wins over Tyler in week 10 and Derek in week 12. Best performance by a single team signifies the most points scored by a single team in a single week, no matter how close the game was. That was my team in Week 8. They scored 179.48 points to defeat Matt. All but two of my players scored in double digits, which were Higbee and the Patriots defense. Derrick Henry, Alvin Kamara, and Tony Pollard each had 40-plus points and 3-plus touchdowns apiece to get 112.3 points. That was the only time I ever had productive running backs because Derrick Henry decided to get injured, Alvin Kamara decided to not exist, and Tony Pollard was always outshined by Ezekiel Elliott and was still a productive piece. Alvin Kamara had a season-high 42.8 fantasy points, and Deebo Samuel, Chuba Hubbard, J.K. Dobbins, and Jamar Chase were all injured on my bench. Two of them really didn't have much of an effect. Deebo kind of fell off after last season, and Jamar Chase was kind of a big eyesore. Justin Herbert was on bye, so I started Geno Smith. Best performance by a single player, if anyone remembers the amazing outing of Joe Mixon in Week 9. Everyone knows just how dominant he was. 22 rushes for 153 rushing yards and 4 rushing touchdowns. 4 receptions for 58 receiving yards and a receiving touchdown. The only 5 touchdown game this year, kind of maintaining what Jonathan Taylor tried to do this year. Cincinnati defeated Carolina 42-21. That was a tough defense to beat. And Derek beat Ryan 148.24 to 119.3. Joe Mixon ended the game with a whopping 55.1 fantasy points. That's not supposed to be Jonathan Taylor. But yeah, it was basically Jonathan Taylor 2.0. Best performance by a bench player. So this is the most points scored by any player that was active, but on the bench of the team that had him. So again, Week 9, Justin Fields. Joe, if you're listening, you should remember this one. 17 for 28, 123 passing yards, and 3 passing touchdowns. I think that's the most passing touchdowns he had on the year. That's not what stuck out. Like a sore thumb, 15 rushes, 178 rushing yards, and a rushing touchdown. Chicago lost to Miami somehow, 35-32, probably because their defense was abhorrent after they traded everyone. And Tyler defeated Joe 141.84 to 120.92. So Justin Fields had 42.72 fantasy points on the bench, which was a season high and basically his breakout performance. So why did Joe lose? Because he started Lamar Jackson, who had 17.52 fantasy points, and no player scored even half of what Justin Fields did on his active roster or his bench. So that's why he lost. It makes sense that he started Lamar Jackson because it's Lamar Jackson. But Fields did basically make him eat his choice. Most consistent lineup, not going to sugarcoat it. It was a 3-way tie. 3 teams kept 11 players from their draft, and we're going to label out who they were. So first of all, our league champion, the Lafayette Hill Hammerheads, so Sean Gallagher. He kept 11 players. He was only missing Hunter Renfrow, Matthew Stafford, Jarvis Landry, Marquez Valdes-Scantling, and the Bucs defense. The average Joe is Joey, so second place. Was only missing Javonte Williams because he kind of got injured out for the season. Robert Woods, Matt Gay, Jameis Winston, who never started a single game this season, and Raheem Mostert. And then the Rodney Kings, Dylan kept the majority of his players, just not Antonio Gibson, Kirk Cousins, Brandon McManus, Tyler Boyd, or Brian Robinson. Least consistent lineup. This is kind of obvious. It's myself. I only had 4 players left remaining from the draft. They were Derrick Henry, Deebo Samuel, Monroe St. Brown, and Justin Herbert. If you look at our draft board, you'll notice a lot of players that ended up being all right that I ended up dropping, a.k.a. George Pickens. Most free agency transactions was me, with 49 players claimed off of free agency. Notable players including Christian Watson, Geno Smith, and Ryan Suckup, who I dropped for a kicker that I don't remember off the top of my head, but I signed him back on after that week. Least free agency transactions was our league champion, Sean, who only claimed 8 players off free agency, but was still able to nab Tua Tagovailoa, George Pickens, and Eno Benjamin, who was productive and then got traded twice. Not traded, dropped twice. And he still kept him. Poll questions. So this is what the league managers answered. So let's get the results of their survey. Who was the best quarterback this season? So, third place with 1 vote was Josh Allen of the Buffalo Bills, who was drafted by Ryan in round 5, pick 41. Second place with 4 votes was Patrick Mahomes of the Chiefs. He was drafted by Taylor with the 33rd pick, 3rd round. And our first place champion, this is no surprise considering the majority of the league is made up of Philadelphia Eagles fans. Jalen Hurts, with 5 votes, was voted the best quarterback this season, drafted by Sean in round 7, pick 65. Best running back this season. So the tie for first place was broken by me. And it was more so my vote that I had already cast. We just didn't want to do another vote. So, fourth place with 1 vote was Derrick Henry, who was drafted by me with the 7th pick. Second place, okay, that was supposed to be third place, my bad. Second place was a tie between 2 players who had 3 votes apiece. One of them was Christian McCaffrey, who was on the Panthers and Niners, drafted by Matt with the 3rd overall pick. And also Austin Eckler of the Chargers, who was drafted by Tyler with the 2nd pick. So my vote went towards, and I know a lot of people that know me are going to be shocked that I chose him, Josh Jacobs of the Raiders. By far one of the best running backs I've ever seen play in this season alone. Sean drafted him in round 5, pick 45. The best receiver this season, this wasn't really close. Third place was CeeDee Lamb. He had a vote for the Cowboys. And namesake of Ryan's team, drafted him 20th pick. Second place, Tyreek Hill had 2 votes. Dolphins receiver, drafted by Tyler, pick 19, 1 pick before CD. And running away with it with 7 votes was Justin Jefferson, drafted by Joe with the 10th pick. Best tight end this season, also not really close. Second place, yes, there's a second place. 2 people voted for Mark Andrews on the Ravens, so Ryan drafted him pick 21 just at the start of the 3rd round, and running away with it was Travis Kelce with 7 votes. He was drafted by Sean with the 16th pick, and probably would have been drafted by Ryan at that 21st pick if he was still available. Best kicker this season. This one annoyed the shit out of me. Would you like to know why? Second place was a 6-way tie. 1 vote apiece. Let's get into it. 1 vote cast for Tyler Bass, drafted by Taylor in round 16. 1 vote for Justin Tucker of the Ravens, drafted by Jen, pick 106, round 11. 1 vote for Robbie Gould, drafted by on the Niners, drafted by Jen. He drafted 2 kickers that were both ranked high. Round 15. Cameron Dicker the kicker. I love it. Eagles Chargers. Not drafted by anyone, but finished with Matt. You want to guess who voted for him? Younghoe Koo, Atlanta Falcons. Undrafted, but finished with Dylan. Graham Gano, New York Giants. Was undrafted and finished with Ryan. So, let's get to our winner. With a whopping 3 votes. Considering he missed 4 extra points the other day, I don't think he would still be this high, but our number 1 kicker was Brett Mayer of the Cowboys, who was undrafted, and I believe, if I'm not mistaken, finished with Derek. Yes, correct. Okay, who was the best defense special teams this season? Let's not sugarcoat it, let's just get through it as fast as possible. Patriots, 1 vote, 3rd place, undrafted, but added by me. And they finished on waivers. Yeah, I dropped him. I think I dropped him for Jacksonville, if I'm not mistaken. How fitting. Second place was a tie with 2 teams who had 2 votes apiece. The Eagles defense, who was drafted by Sean in the 13th round, and the Bills defense drafted by Taylor in the 7th round. First place, by a commanding margin of 5 votes, was the 49ers defense, who was drafted by Jen in round 12. Not even the first defense off the board. All right, best draft pick this season. We'll fly through it pretty easily. Third place is a 3-way tie. 1 vote apiece for each of these picks. So people like the Justin Jefferson pick that Joe picked at 10. People like the Patrick Mahomes pick that Taylor picked at 33. And people like the Dameon Pierce pick that Joe got at pick 71. So for second place with 2 votes, Saquon Barkley, New York Giants, was actually a steal at pick 17, considering he was one of the most productive running backs of the year. But by far, the best draft pick in the eyes of the people was Josh Jacobs, with 5 votes on the Raiders, picked by Sean in round 5. Worst draft pick this season. So third place was a tie between 2 players, 1 vote apiece. One of them was Kyle Pitts. Makes perfect sense. Atlanta Falcons, drafted by Matt in round 5. Yikes. And then he finished on waivers. Derrick Henry was voted for. Yes, Derrick Henry, drafted by me, pick 7. Second place was Najee with 3 votes on the Steelers, drafted by Dylan in round 1, pick 4. And our first place and the first overall selection of the last draft, Jonathan Taylor with 5 votes, drafted by Ryan Pick, number 1. Who had the most well-rounded team? Well, this is pretty runaway, even though you can't vote for yourself. I got 2 votes, which was, thank you. I tell you what, I voted for the next person. First place with 8 votes was Joe. By a commanding margin, had the most well-rounded team. Who had the best team name? This is always a fun one. I like doing this one each year. So, you can't vote for yourself. I will tell you that there was a tie at 3rd place. 2-way tie. 1 vote apiece. Sean got 1 vote and 1 vote for Joe. 2nd place, getting 2 votes, was Matt with Make It Hurts. And 1st place by an absolute commanding margin. Give him a round of applause for changing his name mid-season. The CDC guidelines, Ryan Poyastro Pearson with 5 votes. All right, final league standings. Most of you already know this, unless you're watching just for fun, somebody else's award ceremony, but sure. 10th place, the City Hauler, the one performing the league punishment of standing at Philadelphia City Hall for 4 hours on end with a sign saying, "Honk, 'cause I suck at fantasy football." Mr. Derek Robinson, he aching me, got last place in our league. 9th place, the almost City Hauler, was Make It Hurts, Matt Jones. 8th place, a pleasure to have in class and getting the 3rd pick in the draft, by his own accord, Ryan Poyastro Pearson, CDC guidelines. I'm just hoping he doesn't draft Jonathan Taylor. 7th place, and they tried their hardest is the label, was the Rodney Kings, Dylan Bustler, still looking for his first crack at the top half of the league. 6th place, almost top half, was myself. Definitely underwhelmed this year, but 6th place is better than 7th. 5th place, almost bottom half, somehow, a 2-11 record, Nets, Alaskan Bullfrogs, Taylor, 5th place. Yeah, when I talked to him, he was just as shocked as I was, considering he got 1st place last year with, again, the worst record in the league. Playoffs are where he lives. 4th place, the podium cleaner, Brady Bunch, Jin, with 4th place. Now on to our podium. 3rd place, the bronze medal, which is the participation trophy at the podium, yet our bronze medal winner was the Baltimore Beefcakes, Tyler Murphy, walking away with 3rd place. Now, 2nd place and 1st place are a little tainted, but we'll still get on with what the official results and the NFL ruling says. 2nd place, the silver medal, and the almost undisputed champion was the Average Joes. So Joey got 2nd place. And 1st place, this year's undisputed champion of Hooligans League, Mark III, the Lafayette Hill Hammerheads, Sean Gallagher, walking away with the league championship and the grand prize. So this is the final league standings listed. If you want to pause and go ahead and take a look at that, I'm just going to kind of fly over it because we have our motions for the next year. I know a lot of you are pretty eager to see how these would be voted in and how the league would change next year. So let's get on to it. Our first motion. There was a request to make Hooligans League a keeper league effective next season. So basically what this is, first of all, it was brought forth by a manager who has experience in keeper leagues. So this isn't brought forth just by, hey, this sounds cool kind of situation. Someone actually knows how to do this, and I'm sure they would take lovely time out of their day to explain it to everyone else, because it isn't that difficult. So basically, you would institute keeper players to keep for the next season moving forth, granted that you would stay in the league. So the verdict is tied by a vote of 5-5. So basically, what this means, it's going to go to a revote. It will have a timestamp of 3 days. Each league manager will have 3 days to vote. Whichever votes are not in by that point in time will not be accounted for at all. In the event of a 3rd tie vote, the final decision on this motion will be made by one league manager that I will choose by a random spin of a wheel. Motion number 2, a request to institute a cap to the waiver wire effective next season. Considering I added 49 players off the waivers, it makes perfect sense. So it was brought forth by a manager who did express concern in the high amount of waiver acquisitions of some teams, aka me, myself, and I, compared to others, aka Sean, and pretty much everyone else. So this verdict was tied 5-5 as well, and will have the same exact ruling. It will be attached to the same Google form. Motion 3, there was a request to change the name of the league to a name that would be voted upon by the league itself. It was brought forth by myself at no request. I just thought, I didn't really get everyone's input when I placed the team name. So this verdict was voted yay by a vote of 6-4. So basically what this verdict will ensure is that the Hooligans League name is officially dropped, at least temporarily. So it will be placed into the vote with other league name options that each of the league managers will have the chance to answer and will have the chance to submit. They can submit as many as they want. They will all be included in a final voting. So basically what will happen with this, all of them will be placed in a Google form without naming who submitted them. Each manager will pick their 3 favorites, and of the top 5 most popular favorites, they will all be voted upon in one final vote. Most votes is the league name. So basically, first favorite of a team will receive 3 points. Second favorite will be 2 points. Third favorite with 1 point. That's how you pick popularity. Highest amount of points on the top 1 through 5 will make the final vote. And the ties will be broken by me. So, request to add punter to the list of scoring players. So this is brought forth by me. I just saw an interest in it. I was like, that would be a cool idea. Apparently not a lot of people liked it. Verdict is nay, vote of 7-3. So that verdict will ensure that punters will be kept off the draft board for the foreseeable future unless they be brought forth by one league manager, not myself since it already was voted against. But if anyone decides they want to bring it up again for the next year, sure, why not? So, request to add defensive players to the list of scoring players. So this was also brought forth by me, and the verdict was nay by a vote of 10-0. So, defensive players will remain as a whole defense, not by themselves. So basically, an example would be Philadelphia's defense and special teams can be available draft decision, but Fletcher Cox by himself will not. Motion 6 of 8. There is a request to place a cap of 2 on specific trade requests that are vetoed by the league. Now, I heard some expressed confusion on this. Basically, first of all, it was brought forth by multiple managers. There was a controversy around a specific trade of such manner this past season. I wonder what that was. So basically what it means is a specific trade involving 2 teams and exact same players can only be proposed twice. If it is vetoed both times, the trade cannot be placed forth again. So people voted yay 7-3 on this measure, meaning that a cap of 2 will be placed on specific trades. If the trade is placed again after the second veto, then there could be disciplinary action and the trade will be automatically vetoed by the league commissioner, which is myself. So, and this could be at any point in the season. They could make this trade proposal at the beginning of the season with players that they drafted and it'd be vetoed. They forget about it for maybe 6 or 7 weeks. They place it again, veto it again. They cannot place it once more at the tail end of the season. So, motion 7, request to gather options for league punishments and a subsequent vote on the matter by all managers. Also brought forth by me because, I didn't really get input from other people based on what they wanted the punishments to be. Last couple of years, I've just been kind of doing the punishments I had on mind. So, people really like this. So did I. Vote of 10-0. So that means there will now be an insert link for as many league punishment options as people want. It will be in the same format as the league name policy. So everyone will submit their options. There will be another vote based on all the options on the table. People will pick their 3 favorites. The top 5 move on to the final vote, and the highest vote getter will be the league punishment for the next season. This will continue until there is a motion against it. And finally, motion 8, request to increase injured reserve spots on each team. So this is brought forth by a manager with injury concerns that may be detrimental to an injury-prone team. And considering the injuries that have been piling up in the NFL over the years, it makes sense. So, verdict is yay by a vote of 10-0. So that means that the injured reserve spots will be protected at least at 2, probably 3 injured reserve spots for each team instead of 1. So whenever there are some players that are placed on injured reserve for the 4-week span, they don't have to be sitting on the bench, and people can have other bench players ready to be put in so that they're not stuck with a bunch of injured players. So yeah, Looking forward to the next season. The fantasy draft will be held after the majority of rookies have signed their rookie contracts to their new teams, so they'll be most likely in the preseason or just before it. This will not change by season. The draft will be held in reverse order of the final standings of the season, including the playoffs. So that means Derek will have the first pick, Matt will have the second pick, Ryan third pick, and so on and so forth. If there are any new people added, they will be placed at the back of the draft order, as we did this year with Joe and Derek. And that, if there's multiple people joining, which I would like there be multiple people joining if there's at least one person, considering it makes it even and no weird standings or playoffs. So they would be, a coin would probably be flipped if it were two. With 4, they'll be placed on a wheel and put in that position. So I know we at least have 2 teams coming up this year, including Eddie Weinberger. You'll know him as soon as we get him instituted. We get him a team on the ESPN Fantasy app, which is most likely what we're going to be continuing with. But yes, so you'll know him soon. He will be a team entering this league. We'll have at least 12 teams because everyone seemed to want to come back unless someone changes their mind. So we're looking to get someone else. So if you know anyone who's interested, please refer them to me or someone else in the league that can also refer them to me, and I can get them instituted, get them a team. Recommendations for the new league name, as well as the league punishment for next season's last place team, can now be submitted via a link that will be sent in the fantasy group chat. So this will be sent within the next coming days. I just have to get it all set up, and it'll be all good to be voted on by all the league managers currently watching this. Revote of motions 1 to 2 will also be available via Google form. I'm going to go ahead and attach it to the same survey that will have league name and league punishment, and I'll make league name and league punishment. I'll stretch that over 3 or 4 questions, and I'll make them long answered just so you don't run out of ideas, run out of characters. It'll all be optional except for the first one. So if you have no ideas or don't wish to submit any ideas, just submit no ideas. That's fine. But yeah, so everyone will get the chance to revote on motions 1 to 2 via that same Google form. I'll place the exact same motion there. If you need clarification, please talk to me. All right. Big thanks to our mascot again. There he is. Oh, he's doing it again. And there he goes. All right, thanks. Goodbye. Oh, wait. Oh, there he comes again. All right. And I think that's about it. All right, thank you for tuning in to the Hooligans League, former Hooligans League Mark III Award Ceremony and Distinction. We'll see you next time.